Hello friends, welcome back. Let us continue with our discussion related to group behavior. In the previous discussion, we discussed about different theories of group formation, development and why people join groups. Today I am going to discuss about the structural dynamics of groups. That means what constitutes a group that makes the group extremely and highly functional, orderly and predictable. It also constitutes that when we talk about structural dynamics of groups, it also talks about that how based on the structural properties of the groups, how different interpersonal relationships are being maintained among the team members or the group members. Therefore, structural dynamics describes the four properties of the group, that is role, norm, status and cohesiveness. These are the four properties of the groups that constitutes a group, that defines the structure or shape of the group to make the employees more functional, as they define not only the task that they have to perform, but also about the behavioral aspect, that how and in what manner every member have to behave in order to keep the group functioning in long run. So, if we talk about the first property or the structural dynamics of groups, that is role, it refers to the hats that an individual wear. It is about the roles, specific roles that are being assigned to an individual and how he performs. Now, performance when we talk about is completely based on the skills, competencies, knowledge and abilities, right. But at the same time, these roles also constitutes to understand the intricacies of the role that has to be performed in terms of behavior. So, this is one of the most primary structural elements of the group, where a member performs a specific role in any group interaction, and more formally it can be defined as a typical behavior that characterizes a person in a specific social context. For example, any member of a department or group related to marketing, maybe he will be performing any role specific to marketing. It can be about sales, it can be strategy, it can be advertisement, it can be any form that stabilizes that particular department or cell in long run. So, in organizations, many roles are assigned by virtue of an individual's position within an organization. That is so obvious that as per an individual's knowledge, skills and abilities, the person holds that position by the virtue of what he can do or what he is capable of. For example, any teacher is expected to perform a role to deliver a lecture and conduct exams in a very orderly fashion. Similarly, any manager or a high profile CEO is expected to give orders to his subordinates in order to streamline the whole task for optimum effectiveness. So, these are the behaviors expected by the individual in a particular position. In a particular position means in a particular role. So, whatever the role has been assigned, an individual is expected to perform accordingly in order to fulfill that role, because every role has its own functions that he or she has to perform. Now, when we are talking about structural dynamics, it is not that the person is just holding up the role, it is about an official position that is being given to an individual based on his competencies, based on his knowledge, skills and abilities. So, officially person who holds the role is known as role incumbent, and the behaviors that are expected to is also known as role expectation. Whenever a role is assigned, a task is assigned to an individual, it is not only a role that has been assigned to them. Along with role also comes certain expectations that an individual has to perform. So, the role incumbent's recognition of the expectation of his or her roles helps avoid the disorganization that surely would result if no role expectations existed. This is so obvious that if the role expectations are not clear, maybe the role has assigned, but the expectations are not clear to an individual, that leads to ambiguity, that leads to confusion. This will ultimately derail the whole organizational process, and again from scratch the group has to start. So, the person holding the office of the President of India, this is just an example, is a role incumbent and has certain expectations simply because he or she currently holds that post. It can be of any president of any country, it can be any manager of any organization, manager of any particular department, that he or she holds any position, and there are certain expectations made out of that role to be performed in order to make the organizational process orderly and predictable. But at the same time, when the expectations are not clear that why the role has been given to me and why I am not clear that what I have to perform, it leads to certain level of confusion. This leads to role ambiguity. So, sometimes workers or employees are confused about what is expected of them on a job, such as the level of authority of their particular responsibility. Even they have the authority, but they do not know, they are not aware that what responsibility they have to take upon in order to streamline the organizational process. When this kind of confusion is been experienced, this leads to role ambiguity, which is most of the time experienced by any new member who joins the organization and who have never got any opportunity or very limited opportunity to learn the ropes of the job. That means to understand how the things work in any organization. So, high levels of role ambiguity leads to job dissatisfaction and sometimes turnover or absenteeism, because the person is on the roll, but what he is expected to perform, he has no clarity, there is no certainty. So, this leads to job dissatisfaction, boredom and monotony also, because there is no excitement that what exactly I have to use my skills in order to make the organization more effective. So, this leads to lack of commitment, job dissatisfaction, absenteeism and turnover. Apart from that, when we are talking about role as the structural dynamics of the group, it also comprises of role differentiation as another feature. What exactly it is? So, when the group develops and roles are being assigned, with the gradual passage of time and process, any individual have to enroll in different kind of responsibilities. Maybe one person is not playing only one role, maybe he is playing different kinds of role, and these roles can be in social in nature, or it can be very much task oriented, or it sometimes it is self oriented. So, this process is referred as role differentiation. So, it is a tendency for various specialized roles to emerge as groups develop. As I said just now, that with the gradual passage of time, the organization is engaged in more activities. So, in order to engage or fulfill those activities, perform those activities and responsibilities, one person may be performing different kind of roles from different period of time. This is role differentiation. So, this also becomes a structural property of any organization. So, people perform different functions in an organization, and in other words, role differentiation can occur on a formal basis in a work group. So, it is not that which is very much voluntary in nature, it is absolutely at formal level that how and in one employee has to perform maybe more than one role. So, what are those roles that can be differentiated based on social roles as well? That is the task oriented role. It involves the activities of an individual in a group who more than anyone else helps the group reach its goal. Maybe ex employee is already in performing his role, but at the same time he is also being asked to perform some other roles in collaboration with other co-workers. This is task oriented roles. The other is the relationship oriented role or the socio emotional role. It involves the activities of an individual in a group who is supportive and nurturing of other group members and who helps them feel good. For example, engaging in citizenship behaviors, where one member is readily available to assist his co-workers in finishing a task, although knowing that he will not be recognized by the formal reward system, and still based on relationship orientation or interpersonal relationship, one co-worker can help the other co-worker in finishing up the task. The other is the self-oriented role. This involves the activities of an individual in a group who focuses on his or her own good, often at the expense of others. So, it is this kind of role is actually an individual's discretion to only focus on his own personal interest while ignoring the interests of the organization or co-workers. So, this is something which is completely attitudinal in nature, that how you perceive your role and you perceive the organizational roles from the other co-workers perspective, and then engage with the co-workers in order to complete or finish any task. So, these are the role differentiation. The point is that ultimately these are not very much written in formal, but they are something very informal in nature, but very much performed in a very formalized fashion. So, this is just a pictorial representation of the role differentiation, that how an individual performs different kind of roles, that is task oriented, relationship oriented and self oriented. If we talk about task oriented roles, the employee is initiator or the contributor, he is information seeker, he is opinion giver and energizer. In nutshell, the person will recommend new solutions to the group problems. He will attempt to obtain some necessary facts in order to deal with any problem. He will share his opinion and he will motivate or stimulate the group into action to reach the goal. So, this is task oriented roles. The other role can be relationship oriented, where one employee can be perceived as harmonizer, that he or she can help the group members in resolving the conflicts and create more harmony. They shift own opinions to create group harmony. That means one person can give up his own interest in order to maintain harmony or maintain the interest of the other group members. They encourage and at the same time they suggest ways to expedite the group to work smoothly. So, these are the behavioral functions of employee in any group for in terms of role differentiation, and the other is self oriented roles. These are the roles where one employee can be perceived as a blocker while acting stubborn for the other purpose, but he is very much flexible for his own orientation. He seeks recognition. Performing even a simple task, he would require recognition. He needs attention. He would dominate in a very authoritative manner in order to fulfill his own personal interest, and at the same time when not required he will also try to distance himself from other co-workers in order to maintain only his interest and avoid the other co-workers. The point is that structurally, officially, formally roles are defined on papers, but these role differentiation which we are discussing right now, they are completely behavioral perspective, that is task orientation, that whenever any employee is perceived as task oriented, what kind of behavior he emits at workplace. If any co-worker is relationship oriented, then what kind of behaviors that any employee would emit, or self oriented. But definitely these are the roles which are very much expected or a person tends to emit as per discretion. Alright. The other structural property of the group is the norms, the unspoken rules, which are not mentioned in any rule book or management book, but ultimately norms actually dictate behaviors which actually make the groups more functional and structured, and if not performed or accepted, then it creates a sense of disharmony among members. So, what are norms? So, one feature of groups that enhances their orderly functioning is the existence of group norms, which are unspoken, unwritten rules. For example, unwritten rule can be that we should maintain the secrecy of the organization, we should maintain the timeliness in the organization. So, it is not that any employee would be trained to how to reach offices on time. It is something understood in a very unspoken manner and unwritten manner that we are expected to reach offices on time. So, norms may be defined as generally agreed upon informal rules that guide group members' behavior. They represent the shared views of perceiving the world, and norms differ from organizational rules as they are informal and unwritten. They are informal, they are unwritten, they are unspoken, but still they are expected to be performed at the workplaces. So, norms basically regulate the behavior of groups in many ways. For example, fostering workers' honesty and loyalty. The more you are reporting on time to the offices, the more you are reflecting to be honest and full of integrity. There is more loyalty towards the organization. The more you are helping your employees in completing the task, the more you are considered to be having a sense of harmony that is only contributing to the development of the group. So, establishing such behaviors, maybe small behavioral expectations which are unwritten and unspoken, will only lead to the development of the group. But at the same time, norms are also two types, prescriptive and proscriptive. Prescriptive norms dictate the behaviors that should be performed, which are very much expected and accepted, whereas proscriptive norms dictate specific behaviors that should be avoided. For example, maintaining the secrecy of the organization, and prescriptive norms that we should follow the dress code, we should maintain the secrecy of the organization. So, this is something very much accepted or unaccepted, that is prescriptive and proscriptive norms. But how do norms develop? It is not a matter of one instance or one day or one moment. It takes some time to develop a norm in a very unwritten fashion. So, there has to be some basis that a norm has developed. For example, precedents set over time. For example, seating location of each group member around a table, that this in the committee room, maybe the chairman will have a specific seat location from where he will preside the meeting, and every member will have their own seat location, and whenever the meeting is scheduled, they will take their own positions. This is a precedent set over time. Carryovers from other situations, that is professional standards of conduct. For example, following a dress code. This is a professional standard of conduct. Another can be that in multinational corporations, every employee would punch the card in order to mark their attendance. So, this is a carryover from other situations, that this is how a professional standard of conduct is performed every day and every time at workplaces. Explicit statements from others. Especially this style of norm is especially for new entry who are new to the workplaces, and when they have no idea how to perform any task, and when they inquire from their past members or senior workers or employees of the organization, they would suggest the same thing, that this is how we did it, you also do in the similar fashion. So, this is about explicit statements from others, that is how we do it around here. So, how do we go it, that this is how we are going it, you also follow the same pattern. This becomes a norm. So, the newcomer will also understand that this is the only acceptable way to perform any task or expected behavior. And the last is critical events in group history. For example, that it is expected that we should not divulge the company secrets to the competitors. If someone has done it, maybe the person had to lose his job or the person was hired. So, based on the previous history, group history, it becomes a norm that this is not expected, and if somebody performs such type of behavior, then maybe the person will suffer a loss. So, these are the situations which actually establish norms in a very unspoken, unwritten manner and informal manner. All right. The third element is status, the prestige of group membership. So, group members are accorded different levels of prestige. Whatever the rank, the cadre a person is accorded with, it also accords some kind of status to everybody's role and position. For example, the status of the CEO, the status of the president, the status of any middle level manager or any entry level managers. Everybody has a role position, but every role and position is accorded with status. This includes some kind of prestige, some kind of perks that comes in different forms, and how people take, how those perks or status is reflected in their role. For example, fraternity or sorority officers and committee chairpersons, for example, are likely to be recognized as being among the most important members of their respective groups. So, any chairman of the group will be accorded the highest status in the organization, because he is the highest authority. So, or maybe the chairman of any particular group, maybe sorority, that means a club of women or female employees, or fraternity, where there is one female is the chairman of that club, and how she holds that status. So, this is the idea behind status, that is the relative social position or rank given to any social unit, that is individual, group or organization by others. So, any CEO of the group has a status, not only the special role or important role that he or she has to perform, but the rank, the prestige that he or she holds, that constitutes the status. So, with most organizations, status are recognized both as formal and informal in nature. What is formal status? This refers to attempts to differentiate between the degrees of formal authority given to the employees by their organization. A CEO has the highest rank or cadre, he will having the maximum number of authorities pertaining to decision making. Then comes the another rank, maybe any middle level manager who will have the status, but maybe the authority will be less in comparison to the CEO, or if we compare these authority or status of a middle level managers in comparison to that of the entry level manager, definitely there will be difference in the status of those positions. So, this is about formal status, where the degree of formal authority given to the employees by the organization will vary from one rank to another. Typically, status is accomplished through can be understood or reflected by certain status symbols. For example, objects reflecting the position of an individual within the organization's hierarchy. For example, it can be about job title, maybe the CEO, the chairman, the director. It can be about the perks. The highest authority will be enjoying or is entitled for the highest number of perks in the organization. It can be about the opportunity to do desirable and highly regarded work. Maybe the CEO, the joint director or director will have the maximum opportunity to undertake any special task to perform in comparison to other lower level employees, or a luxurious work settings such as a large private office that is lavishly decorated. So, these are the ways to understand and perceive the workplaces, that in what manner every rank, every cadre carries some status and it is reflected from every different point of view, especially in decision making. Yes. So, status symbols help groups in many ways. For example, status symbols remind organizational members of the relative positions in their hierarchy and thereby reducing uncertainty and providing stability to the social order. So, the highest authority, when is perceived of highest rank or highest status, that reminds the whole organization that who will maintain the social order in the hierarchy and the organization, and how every role is being decided by the highest rank in itself. In addition, they provide assurance of the various rewards available to those who perform at superior level. They also provide a sense of identification by reminding members of the group's values, that a soldier's uniform may remind its wearer of his or her commitment to the nation. So, that means this constitutes that they also motivate employees to work accordingly, so that they can also reach their level, and at the same time when their status is being identified, they also remind the group values and motivate members to perform accordingly, and at the same time motivate employees that whatever value they have as per the role assignment, they will perform accordingly. At the same time, if this is about formal status which has its own structure, own reflection through symbols and decision making authority, the other kind of status is informal status, which is very much widespread in organization, very much perceivable in terms of interpersonal relationship we maintain with every member of the organization. For example, any senior employee who has served a particular organization for maybe last 20 or 25 years will be considered as senior, and he will be regarded with, and he will be accorded with prestige for being one of the senior employee of the organization, irrespective of his position in the hierarchy. Maybe this kind of status is not formally recognized, but yes, based on the day-to-day interaction and interpersonal relationship, we tend to accord such kind of practice to our employees. So, those who have certain special skills also may be regarded as having higher status than others. It is not only about having maximum experience. There are people within the organizations who have special skills and who perform special tasks and roles in the organization. They also hold special status in the organizations, because nobody else can perform those skills except few members. Again, these kind of perception of such roles are accorded with high prestige, and such kind of employees only tend to enjoy informal status with lot of respect and recognition. So, this status is another structural property of the group, right. So, till now we have discussed about the roles as one structural dynamic of the group, the other is the norms and status. We will continue the same topic in the next discussion. Thank you so much.